Before we begin, thank you very much to The Repaint Addict for joining the Patreon campaign. Thank you very much for the support. If you'd like to do the same, it does keep the channel alive. I ask as little as $1 a month to start getting benefits like shoutouts. Discord access is also a thing. And then, of course, if you're at the highest tier, you get to request of me whatever videos you want. So for everyone who's taken advantage of those, thank you very much. And for anyone who that sounds appealing to, please consider it. And I am working on other things to provide in the future. I want to make the Patreon as rewarding for you as possible. So thank you guys for all the support. You're literally keeping me going. So, on Here's 10, we have talked in the past about Transformers who need new toys. And we've done that more than once. From the most obvious G1 characters that are still omitted, to the most obscure you will ever hear about, but are still very deserving. Today, we're going in the opposite direction. We're going to be talking about those characters who seemingly should never get toys again for one reason or another. Sometimes it's deserved, sometimes it's beyond their control, but for whatever reason, I'm willing to take a bet that no one on this list is ever going to see a brand new toy ever again. So, this is where I play my odds again. Can I predict this right? And how long will we have to wait before we know if I'm right or wrong? So, let's figure it out. Here's 10 Transformers who I don't think will ever get brand new toys. And we're starting off the list with something of a cheat. So I didn't necessarily want to start talking about super obscure characters. That's easy, like the most random oddball, like Cindersaur. I don't think Cindersaur is ever going to get a new toy, but that's obscurity talking. On the other hand, there are noteworthy ones that are kind of like a big omission when you think about it. For this, I'm going to consider the Combiner War extra members. So, for the first time in decades, ever since G1, the combiners were going to be done as complete full teams the way they were originally intended. Large figure in the middle, smaller figures on the sides as the limbs. And all the original characters were going to be represented. Kinda. Because they didn't want to overflow everything on the toy shelves with, just tons of different jets, they swapped in Alpha Bravo, a helicopter for the aerial bots. They didn't want to overfill it with cars, so the Stunticons got off-road, a pickup truck. Characters like that. It does make them significant because they're now official members of those combiner teams, but they are stand-ins, they're replacements. They are there simply so the toy line has some variety and doesn't rely on single individual molds. But that does mean we have some characters a part of major combiner groups that we're likely never going to see again. And it's kind of a shame, I like Rook, personally. It's a replacement for Groove on the Protectobots to explain the difference in sizes. However, it's a really nice toy and a really nice design. It'd be a shame if we didn't get another one. Unfortunately, I don't see it happening. The viability of Combiner Wars kind of proved they don't really need to. And I feel like from now on, if we're getting combiners, it's going to be pretty well set and paced out like the modern Stunticons were, so they don't have to resort to any kind of repeats again, or replacements again. So, unfortunately for the replacement crew from Combiner Wars, I think it's just the end of the road. Sometimes a toy is just too good for its own good. I know that sounds a little bit weird, but hear me out on this one. So, I talked about this toy recently, and honestly, I said it there, and I'll say it again. I don't think RID Megatron is ever going to get another figure. In this case, it's down to complexity. And I don't mean how many modes he has. You immediately think to 6-shot and go, well, they just did a new 6-shot, so it's not how many modes he has. There's a difference. 6-shot gets away with all of his modes because just the way he's designed. He's designed in blocks. You rotate the block this way, it exposes treads for tank mode. You turn the block this way, it shows the wheels for car mode. You flip this block over, and oh god, his cockpit and nose cone just turned into a gun barrel. It's things like that that make 6-shot work. Very simple shapes and multiple things on each shape's side. Megatron doesn't work that way. His whole gimmick works because of how dense he is in part count, not only with all of his internal mechanisms and engineering, but how many little pieces have to attach to him and flip out and spin around whatever in order to accomplish all 10 of his modes. This is a pretty extreme transformer, and today when part count and assembly is so much more expensive than it used to be, he's just unviable as a toy. There's just way too much going on with him. As popular as he is with fans, I don't think it's going to be possible today, especially because he uses engineering they don't really utilize anymore. And let's be honest, Hasbro today, let's just think about how Transformers are made today. R.I.D. Megatron, because of how many modes you transform him into, already kind of becomes a loose, floppy mess after you play with it for too long. Don't make the joke! Don't make that joke! How would you feel if they did it with today's engineering standards? I don't think it would go well. Complexity is going to be a recurring factor in a list like this because Hasbro's just not willing to produce overly complex toys anymore. And some cases, there's just so much going on in design and everything it has to do that I honestly don't think it's ever going to happen again. In this case, I'm going to be talking about the Revenge of the Fallen Constructicons. So let's get this straight. This set was already well over $200 if you bought it piecemeal as they came out, and even as a gift set, it's an incredibly expensive set to behold. The toy line, the toy itself, the individual ones are okay. Some, they range from just mid-range, kind of meh, to like surprisingly good. But the combined mode, I know a lot of people just were not happy with what they got overall for their investment. And it's a rickety combiner mode that really can't do a whole lot because of its bulk and because of how it's engineered. So I don't think it's between like how unpopular this version of Devastator is. It has its fans, but let's be honest, it's not the most well-loved design. Between that and just how much has to go into it in order to make it, I don't think Hasbro's ever doing it again. I consider the box checked on this one, and Hasbro's just going to let the secondary market supply anyone who actually wants another Devastator at this point. I mean, it's just too much. I mean, it was almost too much when they made it the first time. I can't imagine them trying again just to make it somewhat a little bit better? Question mark? Point being, between between like the demand being sated and how involved it is, I don't think it's ever going to happen again. So if you wanted one, I hope you got it when you did, because if you're waiting for them to do it again but better, might be a really long wait. Here's one that is just a repaint away, and I have no idea why we haven't seen it yet, because it's a pretty important thing in Transformers history when you start to think about it, and that is Alternator Smokescreen. And I could say the same about just about any of the alternators, but we're going to single out Smokescreen because he's the first. And when I say he's the first, I don't just mean the first Alternator toy. I mean he's the very first time Hasbro produced anything that was strictly collector-oriented. It was the first toy they made that had us in mind. It was 1/24th scale, which was the common scale for collectible die-cast cars at the time, so it fit in with those cars. It was the first time they had actually made an attempt to use the original G1 characters in forms similar to their original G1 bodies. And they used licensed cars, just like they did in Generation 1, long before the movies made that commonplace. You know, it was a pretty huge deal back in the day, and I'm not even sure why. Like, anytime a Smokescreen comes out, or any of the dots and molds, I just kind of think to myself, this is a repaint away from being a Smokescreen homage. And where does that go? Nowhere. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't happen. They've had the opportunity so many times, I'm just kind of shocked that it hasn't happened. I keep waiting for, like, the Alternator 2-pack of, like, Smokescreen and any given Sunstreaker as dead end. And it just never happens, and I don't know why at this point. If I have to wager a guess, it's because it's not as well remembered. A lot of people just kind of make fun of it because of how ridiculously overproduced the toy was. Ultimately, because it shelf-warmed for so long, because they overproduced it so badly, it's kind of seen as a commercial failure, even though it kicked off a collector's line that lasted a few years. So, unfortunately, I just think it's down to Hasbro's perception of alternators. Ultimately, the line fizzled. Well, it had good intentions. You usually found it either clogging shelves or in the clearance aisle, one or the other, to the point where they had to make it exclusive in order to just get the last few molds out. And I think that overall response and that overall fate that those toys had pretty much seals the deal on any homage, no matter how historically important it is to collectors. We're back to the complexity argument once again, and this time there is actually modern precedent for this toy being made. However, it's not likely to happen, because ever since Lio Convoy got a brand new toy in Legacy, the question has been, do the other Beast Wars Japanese leaders become a thing? And I could see Galvatron, I could even see Big Convoy, but I cannot see Magmatron. Number one, there is lack of awareness in the West. He's kind of obscure here today. I mean, fans know it well enough, probably as well as Lio Convoy if we're being honest. But then we get back to the complexity argument. This is 3 toys that have to combine not only into this gigantic monstrous dino mode, but it also has to combine into a fully working, fully articulated robot. And essentially you would be doing just like, you would have to basically just make the toy again, but make it cheaper so it's viable to do today. And keep in mind, all the different colors that go into this, the different types of plastic they would have to switch to, how many different machines would have to be in charge of all the molding in order to get that many plastic colors produced, and the absolute lack of ability to repaint this into anything later starts making this more and more unviable. You also have to remember that in Japan, Beast Wars Neo and Beast Wars 2 didn't go over so well. You know, they didn't do so hot. It was Japan's attempt to capitalize on Beast Wars popularity, but it missed the mark because it kind of did away with a lot of the original aspects and kind of went back to just same old fiction-wise. So it's a rough one to do. It's a really rough one to do. Between complexity and overall popularity, like across the world, I should say, yeah, the chances on Magmatron are low. Like, non-existent, low. This one's going to be a bit weird to talk about because not only is it a toy I don't think is ever going to get an updated figure ever, he's from the original 84 cast. He's a year 1 toy. And I don't think he's ever going to get another figure ever, and that's because of his weird history. We're talking about Bumper. So the name Bumper has to be retroactively applied to this random mold that was released on Cliffjumper cards that a lot of people just assumed was like a yellow Cliffjumper because it was a boxy card just like him, but it's clearly a different model, and they come with different head sculpts. For a long time, we called it Bumble Jumper because it seemed to be a mix of the 2 Penny Racer style Transformers, and it was later down the line that we started realizing, oh, this was like a completely different toy originally, and it somehow just got mixed in with the Cliffjumper cards. You know, whether that was by accident or by intention of providing some kind of like weird running change. Yeah, however you want to frame it. It's always kind of a mystery how Bumper came to be. But we've already had the chance. Buzzworthy Bumblebee did that weird 2-pack of Bumblebee alongside a Exosuit Spike, and that Bumblebee toy is actually using Bumper's vehicle mode, like straight up Bumper's vehicle mode. And that's one of the reasons why you're never going to see him, because he just looks way too much like Bumblebee. They're not going to present the confusion at a mass scale by producing it. You're also going to run up against Hubcap, the actual official remold of Cliffjumper that is also yellow. So you're clashing a lot here. You're clashing a lot. If anything, you're never going to see a Bumper just to avoid confusion with Bumblebee. Because if you're going to release this cute little yellow Penny Racer style car, why wouldn't you just make it Bumblebee and sell a ton of them instead of, you know, random Bumper? That's probably how the Buzzworthy 2-pack came to be, if we want to be honest about it. So yeah, unfortunately, I think he's probably the one toy that was available in 1984 that is never going to be seen again. For number 4, we've got another Megatron to talk about, and you'd think I would be sick of talking about this Megatron after what we did recently on the channel. However, it does stand to reason, because it's a major villain of a major Transformers series that I think is completely unviable. That's the Beast Machine's Megatron. Here's the thing. There's a lot of designs in Beast Machines I could see coming back, and not just the Viacons that fans remember well. I could imagine Hasbro, like crazy Hasbro, doing like random comic book characters now. I could imagine them actually like having the ball bearings to actually produce a brand new Optimus Primal in Beast Machine style. We know we're getting a core class Cheetor that's Beast Machine styled. That's usually to test the waters to see how well it does and how much interest there is before they start making larger toys of these past characters. So, thinking about that, you've got a different structure here. You've got like a different perspective. So I think they're willing to do Beast Machines in maximal form. But the problem comes with Megatron, your lead villain, who is just making himself very, very difficult. So, on top of the fact that you've got an all-blue robot mode that somehow has to become a big red dragon, you've got those arms that have to sit somewhere in the dragon mode. You just hang gigantic arms off the back of his wings. And even then, it's not even about this. It's about the way that Megatron is portrayed. He's never portrayed on his feet. The proper portrayal for this Megatron is hanging from his harness. And you could incorporate that. That could be where the arms exist. But then you need this entire apparatus to hold on to it and be the base where so Megatron can float around. That's getting really involved. And this would all be for a toy that really could never be repainted and reused in any way, shape, or form. So when you start figuring all that in, you start realizing just how unviable this is to produce. Yes, I could see Optimus Primal being made. I could see a lot of Beast Machines characters made. On the super loony world of Hasbro, I could even imagine a Botanica showing up in some random way, shape, or form. But the one place I cannot imagine them going is going to be a Megatron. There's just too much involved to get him correct. And really, trying to work all of it in just to make sure a very low popular version of Megatron is actually portrayed correctly, it's probably not worth it in the end. A lot of these, I admit, I'm kind of speculating on, but this one in particular, I think I'm right, just because Hasbro has made official statements confirming this fear. So, when asked about the RID Bullet Train team, Hasbro insisted that they would never be re-releasing those molds, never be repainting them ever again, because apparently they sold so badly. So keep in mind, trains don't really mean anything to kids here in America. You might have a few who think they're big, cool-looking machines, but even those kids don't know what a bullet train is. That's primarily, something you'd see in Japan. We don't have the infrastructure here in America to run bullet trains. We just have the old-fashioned cable cars, like even in their like standard kind of boxcar style. Even in subway systems, that's all we've got. And most kids don't ever encounter those. Like, unless it gets in the way of the parents' drive to school, you're never going to see a train. Whereas in Japan, trains are part of daily life. There's an enormous culture to them. All kids know and like trains over there. And yeah, they know bullet trains. So while we as collectors covet this team for how well balanced it is, the robots really don't sacrifice that much for the sake of the combination. And the combination has always been one of the smoothest looking and most functional of any combiner ever. But you pour everything together and you realize it's like, if Hasbro says no, if Hasbro is adamantly against this team ever showing up again, that's going to be the end of it. Maybe Takara gets away with something in, far distant future, if these Masterpiece train bots work out. But for now, I really think it's impossible. We've got an obvious one for number 2, and there is a very specific reason I've chosen number 2, because we got to talk about 2 characters, and even there, you know exactly where I'm going. We are never going to see the twins again. Never going to see the twins again. So this one, do I have to explain this one? Do I really have to explain this one? I could just move on to number 1. Number 1, which is even more obvious than number 2. but I have to fill time and I have to make this seem credible. So here we go. Yeah, the twins, their culture, the reaction the public had to them, the accusations of racism about their designs and their depictions, their overall lack of popularity, in general amongst Transformer collectors and kids, really sinks their chance of ever being seen again. So hated were they that they had to strip them out of the third movie. And yes, you can spot them. Yes, Michael Bay, where's my $10,000 you promised if we could spot the twins in the movie? Because I saw them. They're in the back of the lineup when they're going into Nest headquarters. They're there. So we know they were supposed to be in the movie. Stripped out because, hey, we really can't have them happening again, can we? I think the fact that Studio Series has made it to over 100 releases now, and yet you still do not have Skids or Mudflap, even in the ice cream truck form that there seem to be the more popular as, I think it says a lot that they are willing to do Gamer Edition figures before they're willing to do the twins. They want to go to a completely random franchise of Transformers that has long since been dead, and do that instead of the twins. I honestly can't blame them either. Yeah, it goes without saying. You're never seeing him again. A very literal number one with a bullet. This is the most obvious one I could choose, but hey, if we are going to have some kind of semblance of a ranking to this top 10, even though I don't really call it a top 10, there's only one that could top the list and end this video, and that is, of course, Generation 1 Megatron in his proper original form. And that is because of US laws about children's toys looking like real guns. We've been over this a dozen times already. So even if you put an orange cap on Megatron, he's still going to look too much like a real gun. Okay, well, here comes Classics, and we're going to make him look like a Nerf gun, and we're going to add some bright purple and bright green to his design too. Even that is no longer viable. Even now, like, the law has gotten stricter since that toy was released, so we can't do that. All right, we'll reissue this Megatron, but now his entire shell is bright red, so he looks absolutely nothing like a blaster in any way, shape, or form. And they did get away with that, but these days, it's really common to see blaster toys done up in bright oranges and blues, trying to make him look as unrealistic as possible. And they've even thought about that. They thought about releasing Megatron in those colors as a G1 reissue, come up with some weird explanation as to why he's in those colors, and even like back then when the laws were looser, that still wasn't viable. They still weren't allowed to do it. I will admit, if Hasbro just gets crazy one day, some of these on this list probably could happen. But just because of where the US is about guns and about how strict the toy gun laws are now, yeah, I think it's safe to say, of all Transformer toys, a proper G1 Megatron that turns into a gun, we are never going to see again, ever. Ever. And that is the list. So, let me know what you think in the comments below. I know there's probably going to be some debate. You could argue that another Masterpiece Megatron might be released, but that's not a Hasbro release, is it? And I think they kind of nailed it on the second go-around. I think that box is checked. So even in that regard, there are exceptions. There might be. Let me know in the comments below what loopholes I missed, because I'm sure I missed a few. And I will see you next time.
I'm like, I think you guys got this. I will back away, and I will see you all later.
You've got this handled.
Alaffi's like, really? You're not gonna help me? Like, it's fine now.
It's like these disgusting creatures breathing down my neck, and you're all just like, I believe in you. You got this.
All right, you seem to have this. 5 minutes.